The lights in the grand ballroom sparkled like stars as I stood in the corner, clutching the hem of my dress with trembling hands. My sister, the glamorous CEO with her diamond smile, commanded the room with every word she spoke. 500 guests hung on to her every laugh, every joke, every sharp comment. But then she turned her attention to me, her younger sister, the one she loved to mock. "Can you believe," she said loudly enough for the chandeliers to rattle with laughter, "that my little sister thought she could ever stand beside someone like me? She doesn't even have a proper career. She's practically invisible. Who would want her?" Her words sliced through me like knives. The crowd roared with amusement, their expensive gowns and tailored suits shimmering as they clapped and laughed at my humiliation. I felt my chest tighten, my throat burn, and my eyes blur with tears. I wanted to disappear into the polished marble floor. But then a voice cut through the noise. Commanding. Unshakable. Enough. The room went silent. All 500 guests turned toward the man who had spoken, the man who had been quietly watching from my side. My fiancé. Few knew his true identity, but those who did shifted uncomfortably, whispering. He wasn't just anyone. He was a decorated Navy SEAL, a 4-star warrior who had faced battles most of them couldn't imagine. And now he was staring straight at my sister with eyes like steel. In that moment, everything changed. The golden lights of the ballroom shimmered like constellations against the polished marble floor, and the music of the string quartet floated like perfume through the air. Crystal glasses clinked, laughter rolled from every corner, and waiters moved gracefully with trays of champagne that sparkled as brightly as the diamonds hanging from the women's necks. It was the kind of evening that belonged to my sister, a night of prestige and glamour where every detail was designed to make her look untouchable. And of course, she was at the center of it all, gliding between clusters of investors, politicians, and celebrities with that practiced smile that made people forget she had ever been cruel. I stood near the edge of the crowd, hands clasped tightly in front of me, as if I could squeeze myself into invisibility. My dress was simple, tasteful, and far less expensive than the gowns swirling around me. I wasn't used to these events. In fact, the only reason I was there was because she had insisted on inviting me. "You'll finally get to see what real success looks like," she had said on the phone, her tone coated with honey and poison at the same time. My sister, the CEO. The one who had taken over the world with her beauty, charm, and sharp mind. To everyone else, she was inspiring, a woman who shattered glass ceilings. To me, she was a storm, brilliant, dazzling, and dangerous. Growing up, she had been the golden child, the daughter who always won, while I was the one left in the shadows. My parents never tried to hide their preference. They bragged about her grades, her internships, her business deals, while quietly reminding me that I should learn from her example. But tonight something was different. She didn't just want to shine. She wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone who admired her. I realized it the moment she spotted me standing by the dessert table, nervously nibbling at a macaron, trying not to feel out of place. She raised her champagne flute and called out across the room, "Darling sister, there you are." Heads turned toward me, and I froze like a deer caught in headlights. She beckoned me forward with a wave that was more command than invitation, her smile sharp as glass. My feet moved before my brain could resist. As I walked toward her, I felt 500 eyes dragging across my skin. Every glance seemed to whisper that I didn't belong here. The women in shimmering gowns looked me up and down, their lashes batting in judgment. The men barely noticed me at all. When I finally reached my sister, she draped an arm over my shoulders with an exaggerated affection that I knew was a setup. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said loudly, her voice carrying like a performer on stage, "I'd like you to meet my baby sister." The crowd chuckled at her tone, playful to them, condescending to me. She squeezed my shoulder too tightly as if reminding me to play along. "Isn't she adorable? Always so shy." Heat crept up my neck as the people surrounding us smiled politely, waiting for her to continue. And she did. "She's not quite in the corporate world like the rest of us," she announced, tilting her head dramatically. "In fact, what is it you're doing these days, dear? Still figuring yourself out?" Her laugh rang like a bell, and the group around her joined in obediently, not realizing or not caring that they were laughing at me. I swallowed hard. My mouth opened, but no words came out. My mind was screaming with responses. I could tell them about the freelance projects I was doing, the small but meaningful steps I was taking toward independence, but the words were stuck. My sister had always had that effect on me. One sharp look, one perfectly delivered insult, and suddenly my voice vanished. "Don't be shy," she pressed, her smile widening as her eyes gleamed with triumph. "Come now, surely you must have something exciting to tell us? A promotion. A big achievement." Silence. The group shifted uncomfortably, but no one came to my rescue. That was when she delivered the blow. "Well," she sighed dramatically, her voice dripping with mock sympathy, "not everyone can be destined for greatness. We can't all be CEOs, can we?" She laughed, and this time the laughter spread like wildfire. The sound of it hit me harder than any physical slap could. My vision blurred as my eyes stung with unshed tears. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor and vanish from the sea of mocking faces. My sister lifted her glass for a toast. "To family," she declared, locking her gaze with mine, her smile cruel. "Even the ones who never quite measure up." The crowd clapped and cheered, oblivious, or willfully blind, to the cruelty hidden beneath her charm. That was the moment my fiancé, who had been quietly standing just behind me, finally stepped forward. Until now, he had blended into the crowd, unnoticed in his tailored suit. His broad shoulders and calm presence easily mistaken for just another guest. But when he spoke, his voice cut through the laughter like a blade. "Enough." The single word silenced the room. The music from the quartet faltered to a stop, and conversations froze mid-sentence. 500 heads turned toward him. The laughter died instantly, replaced by uneasy murmurs. My sister's hand, which had been elegantly holding her champagne glass, trembled just slightly as she glanced at him with a frown. "And who might you be?" she asked, her tone sharp, though her smile remained plastered in place. "My fiancé," I whispered, my voice breaking the silence for the first time. It was soft, but it carried. People's eyes widened. A few guests leaned toward each other, whispering. They hadn't expected that. He moved closer to me, his arm gently but firmly sliding around my shoulders, reclaiming me from my sister's grip. His eyes locked onto hers, steady and unflinching. There was no malice in his voice when he spoke again, but there was something far more dangerous: authority. "I've faced enemies in war zones who had more honor than what I've seen here tonight," he said, his voice low but resonant. The silence deepened. He didn't raise his tone, but the weight of his words carried across the room. "Mocking your own blood for the amusement of strangers isn't clever. It's pathetic." A gasp rippled through the crowd. My sister's face flushed crimson, though she tried to hide it with another forced smile. She opened her mouth to respond, but for once, she had no words. He continued, his voice unwavering. "This woman you mock, she is stronger than you will ever understand. She has endured things none of you could handle, and she has done so with dignity. Money, titles, applause, those don't measure strength. Character does." His gaze swept the crowd, and no one dared meet his eyes. "And hers is worth more than all the wealth in this room." The silence that followed was absolute. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath shallow as I clung to his words. For the first time in my life, someone had stood up for me in front of her. For the first time, I wasn't the one shrinking under her shadow. I was the one lifted into the light. The crowd didn't laugh this time. Some looked away embarrassed. A few even nodded quietly, their eyes soft with guilt. My sister stood frozen, her smile finally cracking, her carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of truth. In that moment, I felt something I had never felt before when standing beside her. Power. The silence that followed his words was almost unbearable, like a vacuum sucking the air from the ballroom. I could feel the weight of 500 eyes pressing down on me, but for the first time in my life, I didn't shrink under their gaze. Instead, I felt taller, stronger. It was as though his voice had built a shield around me, one I never knew I could carry. My sister, always so composed and untouchable, stood rigid with her glass still raised, her knuckles white around the stem. Her lips trembled just slightly, though she tried to mask it with another practiced smile. For a moment, she looked at me not with superiority, but with something I had never seen in her before, fear. No one spoke. The string quartet sat frozen, their bows hovering above their violins, unsure whether to continue. Even the waiters paused mid-step, holding trays of champagne like statues. The hush in the room was suffocating until one guest finally broke it with an awkward cough. The sound seemed to ripple through the room, loosening the tension, and slowly conversation resumed. But it was different now. Quieter. Hesitant. The laughter that had once filled the air was gone. My fiancé's hand remained on my shoulder, steady and grounding, as if he knew I was seconds away from breaking apart. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, every beat loud enough to echo in my ears. His presence was a lifeline, and for the first time that night, I breathed deeply without choking on shame. My sister lowered her glass with a small clink onto a nearby table. Her eyes, sharp as daggers, found mine, then flicked to him. She tilted her head, her smile returning though thinner now, stretched like glass about to shatter. "Well," she said, her voice light but strained, "I didn't realize my sister had managed to find herself a knight in shining armor. How charming." The words were meant to sting, but the room was no longer with her. A few guests shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze, unwilling to be accomplices this time. He didn't answer her. He didn't need to. The silence between them was louder than any reply could be. Instead, he turned to me, his expression softening, and asked quietly, "Do you want to stay?" The question was simple, but it gave me a choice I hadn't known I had. All my life, I had been dragged into my sister's world, forced to play the role of her shadow. For once, I was being asked if I wanted to remain in her stage play. I opened my mouth to answer, but the words caught in my throat. Part of me wanted to leave immediately, to escape the ballroom and the suffocating judgment that clung to every chandelier. Yet another part of me wanted to stay, not out of pride, but because I didn't want her to win again. She had built her empire on making me feel small, and walking out might give her the satisfaction of seeing me retreat once more. Before I could decide, a man in a sleek black suit approached us cautiously. He was one of her senior board members, a man I had seen in business magazines with her countless times. He cleared his throat, his eyes darting nervously between her and my fiancé. "That was quite a speech," he said quietly. His tone wasn't mocking. If anything, it sounded respectful, maybe even admiring. He gave me a small nod, the kind of acknowledgement I had never received before in her circles, and then stepped away quickly, as though he didn't want to be caught choosing sides. More guests followed, some offering polite smiles, others avoiding my sister entirely. The shift was subtle but undeniable. For once, the room wasn't orbiting around her. The center of gravity had tilted, and though I was still trembling inside, I could feel that something had cracked in her perfect world. Her fury was hidden behind her smile, but I could see it in her eyes, the way they blazed with silent rage every time someone glanced at me instead of her. She leaned closer, her voice low and venomous, meant only for me. "You think this changes anything?" she hissed. "One speech, one moment, and suddenly you believe you're my equal? Don't be naive, little sister. You'll always be beneath me." I flinched, but before I could respond, my fiancé stepped closer, his arm firm around me. His voice was calm, controlled, but with an edge that could slice steel. "You should be careful," he said softly, though the words carried weight. "Because the more you tear her down, the more people will see who you really are." Her smile faltered just for a second before she turned away sharply, excusing herself to mingle with another group. But her charm had cracks now. The guests listened, but their eyes no longer shone with the same admiration. Whispers floated in the air, threads of doubt weaving through the glittering crowd. As the night dragged on, I stayed close to him, my anchor in the storm. We moved quietly through the room, and I noticed how people treated me differently now. Some offered me small nods of respect, others murmured compliments as I passed. It was strange, dizzying even, to be acknowledged instead of ignored. For years I had believed I was invisible in her world, and yet all it had taken was one voice. His voice, to shift the balance, but not everyone approved. A few guests still clung to her side, their laughter too loud, their praise too exaggerated, as if trying to convince themselves she was still untouchable. I saw her smile wider, her gestures larger, as though she could drown out the whispers with sheer performance. But every time her eyes met mine across the room, I saw the fury simmering beneath her mask. By the time the night ended, I was exhausted. My cheeks ached from holding back emotions, my legs sore from standing too long in heels. As we stepped outside into the cool night air, I inhaled deeply, the crisp wind washing away the staleness of the ballroom. For the first time all evening I felt free to breathe. The city lights twinkled in the distance, and the sounds of traffic hummed softly below the hotel steps. He took my hand gently, his thumb brushing across my skin, grounding me once more. "You were incredible tonight," he said quietly. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "I didn't do anything." Froze. "I just stood there while she made me look like a fool." "You didn't," he said firmly, turning me to face him. His eyes, steady and unwavering, held mine. "You endured. You didn't run, you didn't lash out, and you didn't let her destroy you. That takes more strength than you realize. And when you needed it, you let me stand with you. That's not weakness. That's trust." Tears pricked my eyes again, but this time they weren't from shame. They were from something deeper, something that felt dangerously close to hope. For so long, I had believed her voice was the only one that mattered, that her judgment defined me. But tonight, I had heard another voice, one that cut through the noise and told me I was more than her shadow. As we drove away from the hotel, I stared out the window at the city passing by, the glittering skyline reflected in the glass. For the first time in years, I wondered if maybe my story didn't have to be written by her hands. Maybe I could write my own. But deep down, I knew tonight was only the beginning. My sister was not someone who accepted humiliation quietly. She would strike back. She always did. And as much as I wanted to believe I was ready, a part of me still trembled at the thought of what storm she would bring next. The days after the gala felt strangely quiet, like the silence that follows a storm but still carries the heavy scent of rain in the air. I replayed that night over and over in my mind, the sound of laughter cutting into me like a knife, the moment his voice rose to shield me, the look in my sister's eyes when she realized, for once, the crowd wasn't laughing with her but at her cruelty. It should have been a memory I wanted to bury, but instead I clung to it, examining every second as though it held some secret I hadn't yet understood. For years, I had let her control the narrative of my life, painting me as weak, as invisible, as someone who would never matter. That night had shaken something loose inside me. I didn't feel whole yet, but I no longer felt broken either. Still, the silence from her was unsettling. Normally, she would call after an event, rehashing every compliment she received, every deal she secured, every headline she expected. But this time she said nothing. Not a call, not a text. At first, I thought maybe she was embarrassed, maybe she was licking her wounds in private. But I knew her too well. My sister didn't know how to retreat. She only knew how to reload. One morning, as I sat at the small kitchen table sipping coffee, I felt the tension creeping in again. My fiancé leaned against the counter, reading through a folder of reports he hadn't been able to set aside since leaving the Navy. He had a way of existing in silence that was comforting rather than awkward, but he glanced up and caught me staring blankly into my cup. "You're waiting for her," he said softly. And blinked. "For who?" His lips twitched in the faintest smile. "Your sister. You're waiting for her next move." I sighed, setting the cup down harder than I meant to. "Because there will be one. There always is. She can't stand being humiliated, especially not in front of her precious crowd. She's probably planning something already. He closed the folder and crossed the room, resting his hand lightly over mine. Then let her plan. Whatever she tries, she won't break you. Not anymore. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to cling to the certainty in his voice. But the fear was still there, deep and coiled, whispering that I wasn't strong enough. My sister had years of experience in tearing me apart. All I had was one night where I'd managed to survive. The phone rang later that afternoon, shattering the quiet. My stomach clenched the moment I saw her name glowing on the screen. For a second, I considered letting it ring out, but I knew avoiding her wouldn't help. With shaky fingers, I answered. Her voice was smooth, sweet, like honey laced with poison. Little sister. I was beginning to think you'd forgotten me. I doubt that's possible, I murmured, but she ignored the edge in my voice. I wanted to congratulate you, she continued. Quite a performance at the gala. You managed to capture everyone's attention for once. Must have felt thrilling to have the spotlight, even if it wasn't really yours. Her words landed like blows, carefully crafted to pierce. What do you want? I asked flatly. She laughed softly. Straight to the point. I like that. I want you to know that you embarrassed me. Publicly. People are whispering, questioning me. Do you know how dangerous that is in my world? The moment they smell weakness, they pounce. And thanks to your knight in shining armor, they think I'm vulnerable. That wasn't my intention, I said, though I wasn't sure if that was entirely true. Intention doesn't matter, she snapped, her mask slipping for the briefest second. What matters is perception. And now I have to remind them who I am. I can't let this stand. You understand, don't you? A chill ran down my spine. If you're planning to hurt me. She laughed again, cutting me off. Oh, sweet sister, I don't need to hurt you directly. I just need to show them that nothing has changed, that you're still beneath me. And when I do, they'll forget this little slip. Consider yourself warned. The line went dead before I could reply. I sat frozen, the phone still pressed against my ear long after the call ended. When I finally told him about the conversation, he didn't look surprised. I expected this, he said simply. You don't understand, I whispered, panic creeping in. She always wins. Always. She twists things, she controls the narrative, she knows exactly where to strike. I can't fight her. He took my hands in his grip steady, his eyes calm. You don't need to fight her on her terms. That's her mistake. She thinks the only battlefield that exists is the one she built. But strength isn't about destroying someone else. It's about standing when they try to knock you down. You've been standing your whole life. His words settled into me like embers, glowing faintly. Not yet fire but refusing to die. The following week, I saw her face splashed across magazines and business sites again, smiling in glossy photos as if nothing had happened. Interviews, press releases, new deals. She was spinning her story, burying the whispers under a mountain of achievements. But buried beneath the sparkle of her success were subtle jabs. In one interview she said with a laugh, I've always had to carry my family. Some of us were born to lead, and some need a little rescuing. The words weren't aimed directly at me, but anyone who had been at the gala knew exactly what she meant. It stung, but this time the pain wasn't paralyzing. This time anger stirred with it. I was tired of letting her write my story. Tired of being the background character in her drama. For the first time I thought about what it would mean to step out of her shadow. Not to beat her, not to become her, but to finally become myself. I began writing again. Late at night, after the world grew quiet, I sat at my desk with nothing but a pen and a blank notebook. Words spilled out, messy, raw, unpolished, but they were mine. It was like learning to breathe after years of suffocating. When he found me one morning, asleep at the desk with ink smudged across my hand, he didn't laugh or scold. He just kissed my forehead and whispered, "Keep going." But even as I felt myself changing, I knew the storm wasn't over. My sister wasn't finished with me. She was watching, waiting, plotting her next move. And though I was afraid, I realized something important. I wasn't facing her alone anymore. The night of the gala had shaken me awake, but it was this quiet, uncertain stretch of days that began to build something stronger inside me. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving her cruelty. I was beginning to imagine a life beyond it. And deep down, I knew that when her storm finally came, I wouldn't crumble the way I once would have. Maybe I would bend. Maybe I would break for a moment. But this time I would rise again. And maybe, just maybe, I would rise higher than she ever expected. The following weeks were a quiet war. At first, it seemed like my sister had retreated, licking her wounds in silence, but it didn't take long to realize that this was the calm before the storm. I noticed subtle changes everywhere. The way her assistants whispered more often when I entered a room, the pointed glances from colleagues who had once ignored me, and the sly smirks when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Her revenge wasn't dramatic. It was insidious, calculated. She had always been brilliant at controlling perception, and now she was weaving her next trap. Started with invitations. Every event I had been invited to suddenly disappeared. Gala after gala, party after party. She made sure I wasn't included. And yet, every time I tried to avoid the feeling of exclusion, it returned, sharp and twisting. I knew it wasn't just about the events. It was about power. She wanted me to feel small again, to remind me of the hierarchy she believed existed between us. Then came the whispers. Casual conversations in elevators, murmurs in hallways, carefully orchestrated comments designed to make me feel incompetent or insignificant. "Oh, she's just his girlfriend," one executive said loudly enough for a few others to hear. "She's talented, in her own way, I suppose." The words were subtle but deliberate, and they cut. I caught her in the corner of the room once, watching me with that same sharp glint in her eyes, satisfied with each barb that landed. But this time I didn't crumble. This time I didn't run. I had spent the past weeks quietly building my own presence, small as it was at first. I connected with a few colleagues who had once ignored me, took initiative on minor projects, and began asserting my voice in meetings. It was clumsy and uneven, but it was real. And I had him, my fiancé, who reminded me constantly that strength wasn't about perfection. "One step at a time," he said every day. "You've endured worse. You can endure this too." Her true move came one evening when she invited me to a charity event she was hosting, under the pretense that it was for the family. I hesitated, knowing that stepping into her world was like walking into a lion's den. Yet something in me refused to stay home. She had always defined the boundaries of my life. It was time to step beyond them. The ballroom was larger and even more dazzling than the gala months ago. Chandeliers glittered like frozen stars, and the soft strains of a jazz band floated through the room. Guests milled about, sipping champagne and exchanging compliments on her flawless organization. I could feel her eyes on me from the moment I stepped through the doors, the invisible weight of her scrutiny pressing against my back. She moved through the crowd with her usual elegance, smiling and nodding, while always keeping one eye on me. And then the subtle attack began. She asked me to assist with a minor presentation to a group of high-profile donors, knowing that the pressure would make me flustered. She casually mentioned in front of the audience that public speaking had never been my strong suit. Gasps and polite chuckles followed, exactly as she had anticipated. My heart thudded, my palms grew sweaty, and I felt the old familiar panic rising. For a moment I thought I would freeze. But then I felt his hand brush against mine, steadying me. He whispered, "You can do this. Just speak your truth. No one can take that away." I drew in a shaky breath and stepped to the small podium. My voice trembled at first, barely audible over the polite murmurs of the guests. I introduced the project, stumbling slightly over words I had rehearsed a dozen times. My sister's smile never wavered, and I could feel her thinking she had me exactly where she wanted. Then I stopped. I paused, closing my eyes for just a second, and I remembered everything he had said, everything I had realized in the past weeks. This wasn't about perfection. This wasn't about her. This was my voice. This was my story. When I opened my eyes, my voice had changed. It was steadier, clearer, and more confident than I expected. I spoke about the project, my ideas, the impact it could have, and why it mattered. I didn't speak to impress her, to win the audience, or to compete with her brilliance. I spoke because it was mine. The room grew quiet, but not with judgment, this time with attention. I noticed nods of approval from several guests, eyes bright with interest. Even a few of her closest colleagues glanced at me differently, as though seeing me for the first time. My sister's smile faltered. She leaned slightly toward the person beside her, whispering something I couldn't hear, her sharp eyes scanning me with disbelief. When I finished, a gentle applause began, hesitant at first, then growing louder. People I hadn't known would notice me were clapping, and some even smiled with genuine warmth. I felt a surge of adrenaline and pride that was entirely mine. My sister's jaw tightened, and for the first time, I sensed genuine frustration instead of her usual smugness. Later, as the evening wound down, she approached me with her usual polished smile. "Not bad," she said lightly, though the edge in her tone betrayed her. "I see you're learning to navigate my world." I met her gaze calmly. "I'm not learning to navigate yours. I'm learning to navigate mine." Her eyes flickered, a storm contained behind her mask. She opened her mouth, then closed it, seemingly deciding the words weren't worth it. She swept past me, moving through the crowd with that same elegance, but her stride carried a subtle tension. Outside, my fiancé wrapped an arm around my waist, pulling me close as we stepped into the cool night air. "You did it," he said softly, pride coloring his voice. "You stood up. Not just to her, but to everything she's been trying to make you believe about yourself." I leaned into him, exhausted yet exhilarated. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the target of my sister's cruelty. I felt like a person with a voice, with agency, with the power to stand. And as much as I knew she would strike again, a part of me was no longer afraid. Over the next few days, the consequences of that evening rippled through her world. Some colleagues whispered behind her back about how her sister had shined in the spotlight she tried to dominate. A few of her friends and advisors began questioning her motives, subtly criticizing the way she had tried to manipulate the situation. Even in her empire of control, cracks were appearing, small, subtle, but real. And I watched quietly, understanding for the first time that power didn't only come from money, status, or charisma. It came from presence, from authenticity, from being unshakable when someone tried to break you. My sister, meanwhile, became more dangerous. She was silent and deliberate, plotting her next move, but now I could see the strain behind her polished exterior. The fear she had once instilled in me was now tempered by respect, or maybe apprehension. Every interaction with her became a careful game, but I no longer approached it from a place of weakness. I observed, I learned, and I planned my own defenses. And in the quiet moments, away from her gaze, I began to realize something profound. I didn't need to compete with her. I didn't need to outshine her or destroy her. I only needed to be myself, confident, unapologetic, and supported by those who truly valued me. That realization was the beginning of my own power, a power that no mockery, no manipulation, no carefully calculated insult could take away. The weeks following the charity event were tense but transformative. My sister tried everything she could to regain her control, but for the first time, she was met with resistance that she couldn't manipulate. Emails that once contained subtle digs now returned polite but firm replies from people who had seen me stand tall. Invitations she withheld were now unnecessary. Doors opened for me on my own merits, quietly, without her interference. It was a slow and steady shift, but it felt like the walls of her empire were cracking, one careful step at a time. She watched, I knew, from her corner, always calculating, always waiting. Her presence hovered in social circles, in whispers, in headlines, as though her shadow could still reach me, but it didn't have the same power. Every time I met someone new, colleague, friend, investor, I noticed the subtle way they judged her words differently, the way her reputation was no longer unassailable. And with each interaction, I grew stronger, more confident, less willing to let her define my life. Then came the gala she had been planning for months, her ultimate display of wealth, power, and influence. I knew she intended to make this her triumph, to humiliate me again in front of the people who once laughed at my expense. Yet I didn't flinch. I arrived with my fiancé, not as a timid shadow, but as someone prepared to claim her own space. The ballroom gleamed in golds and whites, but my gaze was fixed only on what mattered. My own confidence, my own strength, and the knowledge that I was no longer powerless. She approached as soon as she saw me, her smile immaculate, her posture perfect. "Darling sister," she said, voice dripping with practiced sweetness. "I see you've decided to join us. How bold." "I'm not here to compete," I replied calmly, meeting her eyes without hesitation. "I'm here because I want to." Her lips twitched, as if she wanted to say more, but I could see the tension beneath her mask. She had expected me to hesitate, to feel small, to beg for her approval, but I did none of those things. And in that moment, I realized the final pieces of power weren't in my hands. They were in hers, and she was losing them. The evening progressed with her carefully orchestrated events, speeches, and introductions. I moved quietly through the crowd, speaking with guests, exchanging ideas, and connecting in ways that were authentic rather than performative. Her usual audience, who once listened only to her, now engaged with me. Investors nodded, colleagues smiled, and even a few longtime friends of my sister's glanced at her with the faintest doubt creeping into their expressions. I was no longer invisible. I was present and I was seen. It was during the main speech that her plan truly fell apart. She had set up a scenario where she would subtly humiliate me again, using a faux presentation, inviting comparisons, and expecting the crowd to side with her as they had before. I stepped onto the stage only because she insisted, the audience expecting a show of humiliation. But this time something was different. I wasn't afraid. I didn't stumble. I didn't hide. I spoke clearly, confidently, sharing insights, ideas, and perspectives that even seasoned professionals in the room hadn't considered. The silence that followed my speech was electric. Guests looked at each other, impressed and attentive, and I could see the shift in energy. My sister's carefully constructed dominance faltered. The smile she wore cracked just slightly, and I saw her swallow hard, realizing that her power over perception was slipping. No one laughed at me. No one whispered to one another as if I were weak. This time, I was the voice commanding attention, and she could not touch it. Afterward, I mingled freely, engaging with people who had once been beyond my reach. Her attempts at subtle sabotage, a sarcastic comment here, a pointed question there, were transparent, and the audience no longer indulged her. I noticed a few of her close friends whispering, sharing glances that carried skepticism. The careful web she had spun to maintain her superiority was unraveling in real time. I felt a thrill, not of revenge, but of liberation when the night was winding down. She approached me privately, as if there was a final confrontation to be had. "You've changed," she said, voice lower now, almost unsteady. "I don't know how you're doing this. One moment you're trembling, the next, confident. How?" I smiled softly, the tension between us heavy but no longer terrifying. "I'm finally living my life," I said simply. "Not yours. Not your story. That's the difference." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She studied me, searching for cracks, for weakness, for the old sister who would flinch at her words. But I wasn't there. The years of being underestimated, mocked, and belittled had forged something inside me. I was strong, and for the first time I realized I didn't need her validation. "You're lucky," she said finally, almost a whisper. "You have someone who protects you. Someone who's more than anyone could ever be." Her gaze flicked toward my fiancé, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of respect mingled with her frustration. He nodded. "Yes, I am. And maybe that's what makes all the difference." She didn't respond, only turned sharply and walked away, leaving me standing there in the golden light, finally free from the weight of her shadow. The rest of the evening passed without incident. I spoke with guests, laughed genuinely, and allowed myself to be seen in a way I never had before. The whispers about my sister's behavior were quiet but present, and I knew the truth had begun to shift. People could see who I was, separate from her, and that reality felt like air finally filling my lungs after years underwater. As we left the gala, stepping into the quiet night, I felt a profound sense of release. The city lights stretched endlessly before us, and I realized that the world was vast, full of opportunity and space for me to grow, unbound by the chains of comparison or cruelty. My fiancé's hand in mine was steady and warm, a constant reminder that I was never alone in this journey. "You've done more than survive," he said softly as we walked. "You've claimed your life. You've taken your voice. And nothing she does now can take that away." I leaned against him, a quiet laugh escaping my lips. "It's strange, isn't it?" I murmured. For so long I thought I needed her approval, her guidance, even her control. And now, I see I never did. I just needed to believe in myself. He kissed my temple gently. "You always had it. You just didn't know it yet." In the days that followed, my life began to unfold in ways I had only dreamed of. Opportunities one had once thought unattainable became real. People listened when I spoke, colleagues respected my ideas, and I discovered a strength in myself that had been waiting all along. My sister's influence waned, not because of public scandal or dramatic confrontation, but because truth has a way of revealing itself, and I had finally stepped into my own. When we crossed paths later, there was no dramatic showdown, no final insult or victory speech. She acknowledged me with a polite nod, her expression neutral, and I returned it with calm confidence. There was no joy in seeing her discomfort, only a quiet understanding that the dynamic had shifted irrevocably. I no longer existed in her shadow, and that was enough. That evening, as I sat in the soft glow of our apartment, I reflected on the journey. The humiliation, the fear, the whispered doubts, they had all been teachers in disguise. And with his unwavering support, I had learned to stand, to speak, and to claim my life. My voice mattered, my presence mattered, and I was no longer defined by anyone else's narrative. Looking ahead, I realized that the future was mine to shape. The fear that once gripped me in my sister's presence had been replaced by confidence, resilience, and clarity. I was free, and that freedom carried a weight that was both exhilarating and peaceful. My sister's attempts to control me had ultimately revealed the strength I never knew I had, and for that, I felt a quiet gratitude, even as I recognized the years of struggle behind it. And in that moment, I understood something I had longed to believe all my life. I was enough. I was powerful. I was seen. And I had my life, my love, and my voice, untouched by her cruelty, untethered from her shadow, and fully my own. Enjoyed this shocking story? Like, comment, and share your thoughts with us. Don't forget to subscribe to Twisted Fate Chronicle for more thrilling tales.